Have you ever found yourself awake in the middle of the night, heart racing, worried about what tomorrow might bring? Did you know that your anxiety could be destroying your faith? If you feel this way, this video is for you. Today we're going to talk about how anxiety is stealing your peace and what you can do to take it back. Here you'll understand why living anxiously doesn't change a thing, and how Jesus has already shown us a way to live more freely. I'll show you that the control you think you have is actually what's holding you back. Want to learn how to let go of that burden? Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, you'll discover practical strategies and powerful teachings that can transform how you handle your worries. It's time to trade anxiety for trust and find the peace you've been searching for. Imagine for a moment your life, every detail, every heartbeat, every breath. Now tell me, what could be more valuable than that? What could possibly be more important than your very existence? In Matthew 6:25, Jesus asks us this question in such a subtle yet powerful way. He invites us to realize that life is so much more than the fleeting worries we insist on carrying, more than the food we put on the table, more than the clothes we wear. And if you pause for a moment, how many times have you let the weight of worries steal the beauty of a simple moment? That moment when you could have felt at peace but chose to be troubled by things you couldn't control. But why do we worry so much? Why do we let daily problems take over our minds and hearts? Is it because at some point we started to believe that worrying would give us some control over the future? That somehow it could change the outcome of something? The truth is, many times we are struggling against something we cannot hold on to. The future, the problems, the things that slip through our hands. Have you noticed how frustrating it is to try to control what is beyond our reach? No matter how hard you try, some things simply cannot be shaped by your worries. They are beyond your control. And this is exactly what Jesus wants to show us. If life is so precious, why waste it with anxieties? Can our worries truly add a single moment to our lives? Can we, with the force of our anxious thoughts, alter what's to come? Or are we so focused on what we cannot control that we fail to appreciate the present, to see how much we matter to God? Life. It's worth more than any material possession, any achievement. And if God has already given us this precious gift, won't He take care of the rest? Are we forgetting that the Creator, the one who gave us life, is also the one who takes care of every detail of it? Now I ask you, what's stealing your peace today? What are you trying to control that is beyond your reach? How often do you find yourself in silence, lost in thoughts about tomorrow? Feel the weight of these questions. Let them echo in your mind. Because maybe, just maybe, it's time to let go of what you cannot change and start living with the awareness that your life is more than any worry. Look up at the sky. Picture the birds flying freely without a care. They don't sow, they don't reap, they don't store food in barns. Yet each one of them is sustained, fed, and cared for. Now think, if God takes care of these small creatures, how much more will He care for you? The truth is, sometimes we forget where our provision comes from. We forget that the same God who made the heavens and the earth, who designed each bird with perfection, is also watching over every detail of our lives. We're not alone. But why do we so often feel as if we are? How many times have you caught yourself believing you're on your own? That everything depends entirely on your effort, that if you're not in control, things will fall apart. But the reality is different. Those birds up in the sky, they have no control over what they'll eat tomorrow or where they'll sleep. They simply live, and day after day, they find sustenance. And us? Have we lost that kind of trust? Have we forgotten that the same God who cares for every creature on earth is also caring for us? Why is it so hard to trust? Think of how many times you've worried about what comes next. How many times you've lost your peace, thinking about tomorrow, unsure of how things would work out. And yet here you are in this moment. Somehow tomorrow always came, and God was always there. Maybe not in the way you expected, but He took care of you. Now, I invite you to reflect. What's holding you back from trusting in that care? What are you gripping so tightly when in truth God already holds the control in His hands? If He feeds the birds of the sky, isn't He also providing everything you need? The answer is there, in the simplest things, in the flight of a bird, in the perfect cycle of nature, in the provision that comes every day, even when we can't see it. Can you see it? What's keeping you from resting in this truth? Now stop and think for a moment. How many hours have you spent worrying about the future? How many sleepless nights, trying to imagine what might happen tomorrow, next week, or in the years to come? And in the end, what has worry really brought to your life? Jesus asks us a simple question, but it carries a profound truth. Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to your life? Have you ever thought about that? All those anxious, restless moments, did they really change anything? Or on the contrary, did they only rob you of your peace? We like to feel in control. We like to plan, predict, and prepare for every possible outcome. But the reality is that the future is not in our hands. No matter how hard we try, we cannot add even a second to our lives. And once we realize this, an inevitable question arises. Why do we keep worrying? At its core, worry is an attempt to take control over something we cannot change. But control is in God's hands. He knows tomorrow. He knows every detail of your life. And while we agonize over scenarios that may never happen, He has already prepared the way. So why do we exhaust ourselves? Why do we let the fear of the future paralyze us in the present? If worry can't change anything, why do we insist on carrying it? Tomorrow is in God's hands. He is the only one who can see what lies ahead. And yet He invites us to trust, to rest, knowing He cares for every detail. Now think with me. Have you been worrying about what you can't control? Have you allowed the fear of the future to steal your joy today? How many times have you trapped yourself in imaginary scenarios that never happened? Jesus challenges us to abandon this internal struggle, to recognize that the future belongs to Him, that no matter how much we want to predict what's coming, it's not worry that will bring us peace. Only trusting in God can do that. Do you feel it? The need to let go of what's out of your control? To rest, knowing that tomorrow is already safe in God's hands? Now picture the lilies of the field. They grow, bloom, and show off all their beauty without any effort. They don't work, they don't spin, they don't worry. And yet not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed as gloriously as they are. If God clothes nature with such abundance, how much more will He care for us? Jesus tells us in Matthew 6:28-30, "And why do you worry about clothes? See how the lilies of the field grow. They do not labor or spin. Yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will He not much more clothe you, you of little faith?" And yet we still worry. We still fret. It's curious, isn't it? We know that anxiety leads us nowhere, that it doesn't solve problems or change circumstances, but somehow we remain stuck in it. Why? Why do we insist on spending so much energy on what we can't control? How many times have you woken up in the middle of the night with your heart racing, thinking about what needs to be resolved? Or missed out on important moments because your mind was occupied with something that may never happen? Anxiety makes us believe we're doing something useful, but in reality it steals from us. It takes away our clarity, drains us, and worst of all, prevents us from seeing God's care. If God, in His greatness, is able to clothe even the simplest of lilies, how much more will He care for us, His most precious creations? Have we forgotten this? Is our excessive worry about tomorrow blinding us to the care He already has for us today? Anxiety promises us safety, convincing us that if we think enough, if we plan enough, we can avoid any pain or problem. But the truth is, life doesn't work that way. We don't have control, and for many of us, that's terrifying. But it can also be freeing, because at the end of the day, it's not how much we worry that will determine the course of our lives. It's God's care, and He has already promised that He will never leave us. Just as He clothes the lilies of the field and feeds the birds of the air, He will take care of us. So why continue to carry the burden of anxiety? Why allow it to drain our strength when we could simply trust? It's not easy, I know. But what if that trust is the key to a lighter, fuller life? Now, I ask you, what has been making you anxious lately? Have you noticed that often what troubles us the most is exactly what's out of our control? What would happen if, instead of trying to hold on to everything, you simply let go and trusted in God? How many times have you found yourself worried about the same things? What will I eat? What will I wear? How will I pay the bills? These questions surround us, unsettle us, and often dominate our thoughts. But once again, Jesus offers us a response that defies worldly logic. In Matthew 6:31-33, he says, "So do not worry, saying, 'What shall we eat?' or 'What shall we drink?' or 'What shall we wear?' For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." Here is the key to dealing with our worries. Jesus isn't ignoring the real needs of life. He knows we need food, shelter, and clothing. But what He teaches us is that these things cannot be the center of our lives. When we chase after them with all our strength, we end up moving away from what truly matters. Jesus invites us to reverse this order. He calls us to put God's kingdom first. But what does that mean in practice? It means trusting that if we seek God's ways, justice, kindness, love, all our needs will be met. God knows exactly what we need even before we ask. But do we trust Him enough to leave these worries in His hands? Think about it. How many times have you prioritized the material, the temporary, over the eternal? And when you did, didn't you feel even more anxious? More trapped in a cycle of worry? This is where Matthew 6:34 comes in, where Jesus offers us final advice about the future. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Here, Jesus invites us to live one day at a time. What does that mean? It's not about ignoring the future or stopping plans, but about not trying to carry the weight of what's beyond our control. Tomorrow has its own challenges, and trying to anticipate them only overwhelms us. Think about it. How many times have you been anxious about something that may never happen? How many nights have you lost sleep, worried about what could go wrong, only to find out later that things turned out completely differently? The future belongs to God. We can't control it, but we can trust that He will be there, as He always has been, taking care of every detail. Jesus knows that today already has its challenges, its battles. He calls us to focus on the present, to live in the now, and trust that the future is in good hands, God's hands, the one who loves us and knows us better than we know ourselves. So why continue carrying the weight of a tomorrow that hasn't even arrived yet? If God is already there, preparing the way, can't we rest and trust that when tomorrow comes, He will also give us the strength and wisdom to face it? Life is challenging enough, isn't it? And as Jesus reminds us, each day has its own trouble, but it also has its own grace. And that grace sustains us in every moment, helping us live one day at a time, knowing that the future is in the hands of the one who knows what's best for us. Now stop and think. What are you carrying from the future that's keeping you from living in the present? What makes you anxious about tomorrow when you could be trusting that God is already there, ready to take care of everything? How many times have you felt overwhelmed by worries, unsure of how to find peace amid the chaos? In moments like these, anxiety seems to settle in the heart, taking over the mind and stealing any sense of tranquility. But there is a path to peace, and it is right in front of us. Paul teaches us in Philippians 4:6-7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. This verse is a powerful key. It invites us to trade anxiety for prayer. Instead of being consumed by what we cannot control, we can turn to God and place everything in His hands. And in return, He gives us something the world cannot offer, a peace that surpasses all understanding. Now think with me. As your anxiety grows, what happens to your faith? Isn't it curious that the more we sink into worry, the further we drift from trusting in God? It's as if anxiety and faith move in opposite directions. Every time we allow anxiety to take over our hearts, our faith tends to shrink. In moments when we need to trust the most, it's often when worry creeps in and weakens our belief that God is in control. The peace God offers is not the result of perfect circumstances or immediate solutions to our problems. It's a peace born from trusting in God, from knowing that He is in control, even when things seem beyond our reach. But to access this peace, a step of faith is required: prayer. Now think with me. How many times have you held on to your worries, trying to solve them on your own instead of handing them over to God? How many nights have you lost to anxiety when you could have bowed your knees and spoken to the one who can do anything? As your anxiety grows, your faith diminishes, and it's precisely in these moments that prayer becomes essential, a channel to restore that trust. Prayer is more than a simple request for help. It is a direct connection with God, a dialogue where we open our hearts and in return receive His peace. A peace that doesn't depend on circumstances but comes from the certainty that He is taking care of us. It's a peace that guards our hearts and minds, protecting us from the anxiety that tries to overwhelm us. And you? Have you turned to prayer when anxiety tightens its grip? Have you sought in God the peace that only He can give? Now is the time to reflect. What is weighing on your heart today? Have you tried turning those worries into prayers? If you hand them over to Him, you might find that this peace, which surpasses all human understanding, is waiting to envelop you. Remember, as your anxiety grows, your faith decreases. But through prayer, you allow your faith to be restored, replacing anxiety with trust. We live in a world that constantly teaches us to rely on our own strength, abilities, and what others can do for us. It's easy to place our trust in visible and tangible things, people, systems, and even in ourselves. But is that where we should anchor our security? Jeremiah 17:5 gives us a clear warning. This is what the Lord says: "Cursed is the one who trusts in man, who draws strength from mere flesh, and whose heart turns away from the Lord." When we place too much trust in people and the world around us, we are turning our hearts away from God. It's easy to be tempted to put our hope in someone or something that seems to offer an immediate solution. But the truth is, humans fail, grow tired, and disappoint us. Only God is the firm rock. That's why you should close the door to your room, kneel down, and give all your worries to God. Don't share your problems with those who don't genuinely care about you. In the busy world we live in, everyone is fighting their own battles, and often doesn't have the time or capacity to offer the true support you need. Don't expose yourself to those who aren't concerned with you. Open yourself before God. Jesus calls us to trust Him with all our hearts. In Luke 18:38, the blind man from Jericho cried out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." He didn't go to people to complain about his situation. He went to Jesus with faith. And it is exactly that faith that opens doors for miracles. Miracles don't reach those who complain, but those who trust. Many of us seek to feel God's presence, and that is important. But feeling God's presence doesn't automatically make you a man or woman of God. What truly defines this is practicing God's words, living according to His teachings, following the path He has laid out for us. True faith is not just about feeling, but about living according to the principles Jesus left for us. Another great trap that leads us to trust people too much is the worry about what they think of us. We are constantly asking ourselves what others will say, but no matter what you do, people will always have something to say. If you do right, they will criticize you. If you do wrong, they will talk even more. This is inevitable. And if even Jesus, the most perfect man who ever walked the earth, was criticized and spoken ill of by the Pharisees, What do you think people will say about us? We, who are flawed and limited, will inevitably face criticism and judgment. So don't worry about the opinions of others. Follow your purpose and live your life according to God's will, not according to the expectations of others. Jesus teaches us that true trust is in God, not in men. When we trust in God, we are freed from the need to please others and from the criticisms that will inevitably come. We know that our strength and value come from Him, and that gives us peace. In such a noisy world where opinions, advice, and distractions seem to surround us from all sides, it's easy to get lost in the excess of words. We talk too much, think too little. But biblical wisdom guides us in the opposite direction. In Proverbs 10:19 we are warned, "When words are many, sin is not absent, but whoever restrains their lips is prudent." This verse reminds us that the more we speak, the more we risk going wrong. A rushed mouth, a thoughtless word, often puts us in unnecessary situations. But wisdom lies in silence, in reflection before acting or speaking. We live in a society that values speaking, expressing ourselves at every moment. But what if the key to true peace lies in the opposite? In the silence that precedes action. Silence has a transformative power. It gives us the space to hear God's voice and reflect on what truly matters. When we stop to listen instead of speak, we begin to see things more clearly. Our minds calm down, our hearts find peace. And in the midst of this silence, we realize that God is present, guiding every step, even when everything around us seems chaotic. The truth is, we often use words as shields, trying to protect or justify ourselves, when in reality we need fewer words and more reflection. The Bible teaches us to be quick to listen but slow to speak. James 1:19. Silence invites us to exercise patience and humility. To destroy your anxiety, pray more. Don't share your anxieties, fears, restlessness, and worries with those who can't solve them. Many times we trust our concerns to people who do not have the ability to help us, and this only increases our burden. But when you take those concerns to God, the one who knows your past, present, and future, He lightens your load. Trust completely in the only one who has already seen you in the future. Only God knows every detail of your path and knows what lies ahead. He is the one who can show you the next step. It's not in others' opinions or superficial advice that we will find answers, but in sincere prayer, when we lay our fears and anxieties before God. How many times have you regretted speaking too much? Listening to people or situations that didn't deserve your attention? When we talk too much, we often lose control and end up in complicated situations. But the Bible reminds us there is wisdom in listening more and speaking less. The noise of the world can be a dangerous distraction. The voices around us, opinions, criticism, poorly grounded advice, can pull us away from God's will. And the more we rely on external voices, the harder it becomes to hear God's gentle voice, which speaks through stillness and prayer. Silence is not inactivity. On the contrary, it is an opportunity to connect more deeply with God, to make room for Him to guide us. In silence, there is space for sincere prayer and meditation on the Word. It is in this space that God transforms our inner selves, shapes our character, and aligns our thoughts with His. The rush and noise only distract us, but silence brings us back to the center of God's will. When we stop talking, we stop relying so much on our own words and ideas and begin to depend more on God. This is the moment when we learn to trust Him, and not our own opinions or the words of others. After all, the more we speak, the more we risk drifting away from God's will. Have you made room for silence in your life? Or are you letting yourself be swept away by the constant noise around you? The answer isn't always in words, but in the space you create for God to speak. Whether it's the silence that stops us from speaking impulsively, or the silence of the soul where we find wisdom and direction, both are precious. And perhaps what you need right now isn't more words or actions, but a pause. A pause to listen to God's voice, which is gentle but powerful. So I ask you, have you allowed silence to be part of your day? Have you made space to reflect and listen to God before making decisions or speaking? Or has the noise of the world drowned out that gentle, wise voice? Remember, sometimes the answers you seek aren't in words or the advice of others, but in the silence that connects you to divine wisdom. More importantly, the peace you are searching for won't be found in the noise, but in the quiet rest before God. As Psalm 46:10 reminds us, "Be still and know that I am God." How many times have you felt tired, overwhelmed by so many worries and anxieties? The world around us seems to demand more and more from us, and in the midst of it all, it's easy to lose our peace and feel suffocated. But Jesus offers us an invitation that carries a powerful promise. In Matthew 11:28-30, he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Here, Jesus invites us to give everything to him: our exhaustion, our worries, and our anxieties. When we are overwhelmed, he is the only one who can give us the kind of rest that truly restores. But what does it mean to take the yoke of Jesus? It means fully trusting in him, accepting his way, and learning from him. It means surrendering our control and our struggles into his hands. So often we try to carry the burdens of life on our own. We think we need to solve everything, control every situation, and manage every detail. But that load is too heavy for us. Jesus teaches us that when we surrender to him, the burden becomes light. When we truly trust in his care and his love, we find rest, not just for our bodies, but more importantly, for our souls. Think about this. What has been weighing you down? What have you been trying to carry on your own? Jesus is ready to receive that burden and, in exchange, give you peace. But for that to happen, you must trust. You must surrender. Anxiety makes us believe we're in control, but in reality, it only pulls us further away from the peace that God wants to give us. The key to victory over anxiety is in trusting more and surrendering more. As we give ourselves to Jesus, our anxieties lose their power over us. The rest he offers is not temporary, it's a rest that renews and transforms. But to reach it, we must let go of the need for control. Jesus promises that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. This means that when we follow his guidance and allow him to lead us, the weight of life becomes lighter. Not because the problems disappear, but because we are no longer carrying them alone. He carries the weight with us. Beyond freeing us from anxiety, Jesus also frees us from the expectations of others. Many of our burdens come from worrying about what others think. But, as we've seen before, no matter what you do, people will always have something to say. Even Jesus, the most perfect man who ever walked the earth, was criticized and spoken ill of by the Pharisees. If even he faced this, why should we be concerned about the criticisms we receive? Jesus calls us to focus on what truly matters: our relationship with him and our inner peace. When we are aligned with God's purpose, the opinions of others lose their importance. What truly matters is what God thinks of us, and he has already given us the highest value, the sacrifice of his Son. Jesus calls us to rest in him. But this rest is not passivity, it's active trust. It's trusting that he is in control, that he knows what is best, and that he is by our side every step of the way. He invites us to exchange our burdens for his, because the burdens of Jesus don't weigh us down, they set us free. Now I ask you, are you ready to hand over your anxieties and accept Jesus' invitation? Are you willing to let go of control and allow him to guide you, trusting that he will take care of every detail of your life?